Right, welcome to our second Tides and Talks. Thank you all for coming down. So this is kind of, if you weren't here last time, I'll give a brief overview. So the Estuary Program is a community-based program. We are locally governed, working to try to address some bigger issues, things like stormwater, wastewater, those types of things, trying to get folks talking to each other. And we write a lot of grants to try to get projects on the ground. So one of the things that we like to do is to hear feedback from the community. We used to have a community action committee, but participation kind of went up and down and we didn't feel we were getting the feedback that we were looking for. So we've kind of reconfigured into this Tides and Talks forum where you guys get to learn a little bit of something and then we get to learn from you. So this is very informal. Feel free to raise your hand, ask questions. And so we'll today, oh, sorry, Lisa, I didn't go to my next slide. So the Tides and Talks is to engage everybody. And so please, this is an informal session. We're going to hear from 3 people today, and then they're going to take questions, or you can ask some other questions to the Estuary Program staff as well. And so we are joined today by Bay County Conservancy. We have Jacqueline Kolk, the Vice President. We have the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, Cami and Getty. Okay, our field biologist, and then Billy Moore, wildlife biologist from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And so today we really wanted to kind of focus on upland management. And so we're not just about what's in the water and the bays. We are focused on everything that affects the bays, which includes our watershed and our land conservation. So I'm going to ask Jacqueline to come up first. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, thank you.
No, wait, I got to record.
Oh.
Wait, are you sure you're not recording?
Oops, I don't think you are.
No, you are. Okay, now the floor is yours.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, let me throw this back up.
Or can I just move this so I can put this paper?
I'll move this for you.
That's fine, I'm good. That's our website.
Yeah, we just put a fun little picture up there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Hey.
I'm Jackie Kolk. I am the Vice President of the Bay County Conservancy, which is a 501c3 nonprofit land trust known as the Land Conservancy for Northwest Florida. And it's dedicated to the preservation of environmentally sensitive lands in our area. We do land acquisition and stewardship. We do by acquiring land, determining how we can get it environmentally preserved and sound to get rid of the invasives. We do wetland restoration, we do trail maintenance, we do cleanups, we do signage, removal of exotic species. We also do community outreach, so this is great, where we have site visits and tours and anything that will raise public awareness. And we have newsletters and fact sheets and brochures. There are some on the back table. They look like this. We have more if you want more. I can certainly get you more. And we have a website which has access to information on all but the most recently acquired preserves. And it's kept up to date with what's going on. So if you are interested, you certainly, please look at it. We all want clean water. We all want open space for hiking trails, wetlands for wildlife, stormwater management, clean water, and all of those things. And that's what the Bay County Conservancy's mission was. Local land trusts got started in the United States back in the 1890s when a group in Massachusetts organized the trustees of reservations to acquire what is now World's End, which is a beautiful urban waterfront park designed by architect Frederick Law Olmsted, if you have any history interest. And it had been considered, this peninsula where the park is, had been considered as a housing project and as a possible UN headquarters and as a power plant. And the local people just decided, no, they couldn't do that. They had to save it for future generations, and they didn't, it's still there. But by 1950, there were 53 land trusts in 26 states. Today, all 50 states have land trusts, and there's something between 20 and 30 nonprofit land trusts in Florida. Some of the groups, like the Bay County Conservancy, buy land and maintain it, and it's always open to the public with restrictions. I mean, it's not open all night and you can't just burn things down, but it is open for hiking and such. Some acquire the land and look for ways to turn it into public ownership, and some land trusts acquire conservation easements and hold just the easements on it. But the Bay County Conservancy was started in 1998 when a group of local people realized that 23rd Street had been a very sleepy 2-lane road for years. And all of a sudden, it wasn't. It was 4 lanes and growing rapidly. And a group of local doctors had started the hospital over on 23rd Street, but they had held on to the wetlands. And so we all kind of got together and said, okay, could you give it to us, or could you sell it at a reasonable price and just give us a little bit of time to get the money to buy it? And so that all worked out, and that's what Audubon Nature Preserve is now over on State and Jenks and Doctor's Pond, and the boardwalk, which was built by AmeriCorps, is still there. And the walking trail has been destroyed. It was destroyed in the hurricane and is only very partially restored. But that whole area will be part of a redevelopment project where the city is trying to manage the water better. And that is kind of the focal point of the area, where there used to be a pond out there. You really could go kayaking or canoeing, but over the years that's gone. So anyway, it should be, put back together. Walmart is right next door to it now, and they have been helpful over the years in having people, pick up stuff and things like that. There's another wetland in the nearby area called the King Preserve. That King family had been here for many, many years, and they sold that land to the preserve in 2001 at a very reduced price. The next acreage was up at the Bay Washington County line, and acreage has been added to that over time. We now have a fair amount of acreage up in that area. There are problems, of course, with trying to manage land. We have invasive plants and animals like popcorn trees and privet and climbing fern and air potatoes and now Cuban tree frogs and who knows what else. So this is a continuing project. Vandalism has been something of a problem in the urban areas and homeless camps. And while we are very concerned and sympathetic to the plight of the people who are living there, it's still a problem. We can't have people living in camps there. Finding money to pay for maintenance and new properties is always a challenge. And also letting people know what the Conservancy does. So we're glad to be here today, just to let you all know, if you haven't heard about it, that it is out there. And, we hope you'll look into the 24 preserves that we now have. Including, we just, in the last couple of months, we got 7 acres near Deer Point Lake, and these were gifts, 33 acres at 231 and 20, 5 acres on Burnout Road in Fountain, which you better not go to unless you have 4-wheel drive and are serious about it. And 20 acres off of Rollohome, which is also very nice. And that one will be named for a particular family member of the Heaton family who donated it. But we have been able to do that. We have provided habitat for birds, butterflies, bees, and some of the larger preserves, larger animals. We have certainly provided a way for underground aquifers to get water and then hold it, so it's recharged and cleaned before it ends up in the bay. The green space gives the rainwater, a chance to, just everybody benefits from green space, whether it's absorbing carbon dioxide, emitting oxygen, just allowing for recreation, allowing for educational activities. We often have school groups that go and, look at the plants and the trails and the water and so on. And it has also happily been a way for the Conservancy to preserve property that was inherited and really cherished by families. Like we have the Olds Preserve, which is up in Lynn Haven, and that was a gift from Mrs. Olds' family. And if you look at the 24 preserves in 6 counties now, but if you look at the website, you can tell where they are and what they have and, you know, just what's going on. It also prevents flooding, which the city has always been glad of because 23rd Street obviously grew tremendously. Individuals can truly make a difference in local land conservation. And if you would like to help in any way or like more information, please let us know. Consider becoming a member or volunteering. We're always having work days and, you know, doing environmental assessments and things like that. And if you ever want to help, you know, we're happy to have you. So are there any questions that I can answer? I've been active since the beginning. It's on the original board of directors. So. Yes, sir.
Lady, before you mentioned that you grant grants to folks, are those privately funded grants from donations?
Yeah, we look for grants.
You look for grants.
We write grants and we have gotten grants from any number of places, yes. Do you have a project that you're interested in?
I was just curious how you fund yourself, basically.
Oh, well, donations, membership, and grants, all of those things. We also have worked with and still do on a couple of big projects. Government projects like we have Panama City Crawfish, which are here, and those are managed by various government groups. So we do whatever we can think of to keep it all going, but mostly it is members, donations, grants, and then when we can, working with government agencies in whatever way.
Do you have time to give these kind of talks to the other 5 counties so that they're aware that you're here?
That we're here and
Yeah.
we're active and sure, somebody will, yeah. Yeah, I still work every day, but that's okay, but no, but we have a couple of people who, yes. And the other counties may in fact not know much about it.
That's what I'm thinking, right?
Because we haven't been, I mean, we hold the land, we maintain the land, but no, we haven't been as active in those other counties.
Well, it takes time and, yeah.
It does.
I know that was one thing I learned from Candace when we were interviewing her previously for our CCMP is that you guys do go outside of Bay County and I did not realize.
6
how
counties.
much- Yeah, how much land you have.
And
in other
because
areas.
it's that land, all of the land outside of the county has been donated. And most of them, not all, but are named for family members who either acquired it or really liked it, wanted it saved.
So how do you think they found your name if they're out of our county? Just by.
Because if you look, there are very few land trusts that have been active for that long.
Okay.
And so I guess that way is probably how they found us.
It's also a gap in Northwest Florida.
There
It's
is.
really, you're kind of,
Right.
we're covered by other regional groups, but not really a local
A
group.
local group, and we're local.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're here.
It's impressive, yeah.
Do you remember your total acreage off the top of your head?
It's right at 600. We wish it were a whole lot more, but
That's impressive
Yeah,
for a
but-
volunteer-based
Yeah.
group.
yeah, and when we started out, we were happy to get Doctor's Pond. We didn't know that we'd ever do really any more than that, but there are 24 preserves now, and even the small preserves take work, like we have a piece right across the street. The Mariola Reynolds Miller Home Preserve, which is right there. If
Yeah.
you haven't been there, and it's a nice place to walk, and the mural on the Gallery of Arts wall is
Don't go anywhere.
also very interested in, I mean, it's very pretty to look at. Yeah, we did have one vandalism issue there where somebody painted over it, but it's been fixed, so.
So an online question, there's maps when you look at each project. Is there a county map noting the location of all the properties, especially any that allow public access?
I don't think
Oh,
so.
and Teresa comments, getting a
Maybe.
properties map is on our wish list. So I know we have all of those maps in our GIS database that we can certainly
Oh, good,
provide.
that'd be great.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a list that Teresa has put together of
Yes,
each one.
and we got that
And
list.
some
from Canada.
directions, but I don't have a map that says, but that would be helpful.
Yeah, we
because
have,
then people
Ryan
can-
has it in there already, so we can definitely,
People can go and actually find them.
yes, and you said all of them include public access, right?
They all have public access if it's appropriate. Now,
Okay.
some, it's
It's
not.
not safe, yeah.
So we might just need to add that into the map.
And
but that
here,
would
there's
be
a
easy.
boardwalk here, there's a walking trail
Yeah.
here, or there really isn't anything, or we're working on it, which is often the case too. We're working on it. Well, thank you for
Other questions? All right.
having the Conservancy here and just listening to, you know. I really think there's a lot that can be done, including, I wish the city would buy the land next door.
Yeah.
I've wished it for years, because that would leave more open space on the
Right.
bay.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you all.
Appreciate it. There's one more comment. No Q's plantation, no Q's plantation. They're in the process of forming a land trust.
Who?
Nagosi, I'm like, I know I'm saying this wrong. Nagosi Plantation. So they're over near Bruce, Florida. FYI.
That's good to
Yeah.
know. Okay, right, yeah. Right, sorry. Yeah, I've been there.
All right, next up, we're gonna learn about wetlands restoration at Deer Lake State Park. And Cammy and Getty,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for having us. I am Camry Adams, a field biologist with the Atlanta Botanical Garden.
And I'm Getty Hammer. I'm also a field biologist with Atlanta Botanical Garden.
We're here to tell you a little bit about wetland restoration work that we do at Deer Lake State Park. Before I continue, I want to just introduce some of the members of our team that aren't here. We have Dr. Emily Coffey. She's the Vice President of Conservation and Research. She kind of runs the department, does a fantastic job of doing it. Jeff Talbert is our GBIF project coordinator. He's who we work with closely on our project. Kelly Coles is the Gulf Coast coordinator, and she deals with a lot of the projects outside in the Panhandle, dealing with rare plant monitoring and seed collection. She also works closely with Caitlin Crocker, our fellow field biologist, on another project happening in the park that we'll touch on shortly.
Hey, awesome. So as mentioned, our project is mainly focusing on restoring wetlands within Deer Lake State Park. And so our main goal in that is to clear overgrown vegetation out of our wetlands in order to restore the hydrology within them and then allow the chance for some of those remnant wetland species to reestablish within our park. And so we do this mainly through the use of mechanical clearing paired with fire management. And so in that, we don't use any herbicides within the park. So it's all just mechanical clearing paired with that fire management following the clearing. And so in addition to restoring these wetlands, we're also studying the efficacy of how effective our restoration practices are without that use of herbicides. And our projects are encompassed in two projects, one being funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and then the other being funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so first, kind of focusing on our project that is funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we have received $9.1 million from the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund, or GBIF, as previously mentioned. And so with this, we've partnered with the Florida Park Service, who focuses more on the operational side of things, doing a lot of the clearing for us, as well as some of that prescribed fire. We partnered with them, and then on our side, we do a lot of the coordination for that clearing and fire, as well as the scientific research of that restoration, both through the vegetation monitoring and then the analysis of that data. And so with the Florida Park Service, we were contracted to clear 220 acres by 2021 and then 310 acres by 2025. And so to date, we've been able to clear over 312 acres of wetlands. And so that surpasses 100% of that original 310 acre goal. And that clearing takes place at about a rate of a little bit over 2/3 of an acre per week. And so now that we're kind of ending our restoration process at Deer Lake State Park and wrapping everything up there, we're really setting our sights towards applying that same restoration and scientific research towards Grayton Beach State Park, as well as Topsail Hill Preserve State Park.
All right, so I'll touch a little bit on the Environmental Protection Agency side of things. This is not our project, but our fellow field biologist, Caitlin. So I'm going to run through this briefly. If there are any questions, there will be an email at the bottom of that slide that you can contact. But we did get 1 million from the EPA Restore funds to study the effects of restoration. So what's working and what doesn't. So Caitlin has 16 total restoration treatments across 8 sites at Deer Lake State Park. She's looking at things like hardwood removal of the duff layer. So a lot of those extra leaves and nutrients that are there, removing it to get back to a nutrient poor habitat that a lot of these wetland plants thrive in. Prescribed fire, because again, a lot of these plants are fire dependent and these habitats are, as well as diaspore transfer, which is essentially taking old seed heads from a historical prairie and bringing them to these plots to see how they grow. She looks at several factors. 2 of them are partnerships actually with the University of Florida. The first one is looking at hydrology. This is with Dr. Matt Deitch. He looks at the chemical levels and the flow of groundwater in the streams. This is because we have 3 different watersheds happening at Deer Lake State Park. And so that water moves through the watersheds to our coastal dune lakes and out to the ocean. And so how that water moves impacts our habitats and our environment. So we're looking at that. Vegetation is a partnership with Dr. Debbie Miller. They're looking at the vegetation diversity of over 200 plots with reference prairies to see kind of the biodiversity of what's going on there. They take soil samples that are sent off to a lab to look at chemical and physical changes through restoration actions. Now, my personal favorite is the herpetofauna. This is your reptiles and your amphibians. It's the response and diversity of these herps in response to the restoration actions. She does this through things like call counts, where she goes out at night and listens to what's there. Cover boards, because a lot of stuff likes to hide underneath. Drift arrays to help focus these species and make identification easier of them. And PVC, because a lot of these species like to hide out in the little tubes. And it's important to focus on this because they are predator prey. And so it's a very important indicator for how these systems are reacting to our restoration. Her project is actually wrapping up. It's set to be complete in spring of 2025. And that data is used to guide further restoration of wet prairies with a focus on shrub encroachment. And again, if you have any questions, you can contact our Gulf Coast Coordinator, Kelly Coles, at that email below.
Okay, and so every project has to start somewhere, and we really owe the beginnings of our project to the white-fringed orchid, or Platanthera blephariglottis var conspicua. And so this state-threatened orchid was coincidentally found while there was routine mowing at Deer Lake State Park. And so finding this orchid really triggered the idea that if there are these remnant important wetland species hanging on, then maybe by restoring the habitats to their former state, we would be able to allow for these to reestablish within the park. And so for some background, this is Deer Lake State Park in 1941. So of course we have our coastal dune lakes, Camp Creek and Deer Lake, and then Deer Lake State Park itself. So as you can see, we have a very open canopy with very few trees, which is exactly what you would want to see in a fire-maintained wet pine savanna. So the species that occur in these wet pine savannas really prefer open canopies with lots of sunlight. They need a lot of hydrology and saturated soils, and then they also really prefer soils that are very low in nutrients and acidic in nature. And so unfortunately, due to fire suppression, several decades later, we see that there's a lot of hardwood encroachment within those wetlands. And so this was at the project beginning, again, several decades later. And a lot of that hardwood encroachment is going to be due to Cliftonia or black tie. And so that is a huge issue for several reasons. So the black tie is going to create these dense thickets and monocultures of the trees, And what they are going to do is shade out those native plant species. Again, the tai is native, but it's not characteristic of these habitats. But they're going to shade out those species, and it also makes it very hard to properly and safely apply prescribed fire to these systems. They also absorb a ton of water, which ends up altering the hydrology of the system. And then when they drop their leaves, they actually also leach nutrients into the soil, which is exactly the opposite habitat type that our wetland species are going to prefer. And so zooming in to one of our targeted wetlands, again, this is a satellite map of that wetland. In 1941, we see a lot of open space and open canopy. And then in the middle there, you can see that there's almost no trees. So this is where one of those remnant wetlands would have been, with a lot of open space. And again, unfortunately, due to fire suppression, several decades later, we see that the majority of that wetland is completely overgrown and diminished. Now, within that shaded area in the middle is actually where some of those important remnant wetland species were found, like our pitcher plants, important fire-carrying grasses, as well as orchids. And so again, the idea was, since those species are still hanging on, if we restore their habitat, will they be able to reestablish once we clear out that area? And so we've worked very hard to clear out that same wetland and apply fire, but also taking care to leave some of those tree species behind, especially pine trees, because their needles are going to be a very important source of fuel when we do apply prescribed fire. But as you can see, we have effectively cleared out those areas pretty successfully. Now, thinking about one of those really dense black tie thickets, this is what that would look like from the ground. And so this is what it looks like before we end up clearing one of those wetlands. So as you can see, it's pretty much a monoculture of only that black tie. We have very little light coming through, very little biodiversity in the ground cover, and especially none of those important wetland species like the pitcher plants, the orchids, and grasses. And so after clearing these areas and applying prescribed fire a couple times, then we typically see that these species are able to reemerge and reestablish themselves as the former wetlands once were.
All right, so what you're looking at is actually an overall project map of all of our different sites. The red are all the parcels that were in phase 1 that we were contracted to complete by 2021. Everything in green are the parcels that we added in phase 2 with the amendment in 2021 that we were contracted to complete by 2025. And so I do want to reiterate that we are not trying to get rid of anything completely. The Cliftonia is supposed to be there. We're trying to just get it back to what it was historically and back to that balance. We want to see more of what's in the front of this picture than the higher shrubs in the back. And to do this, we had to start off small with smaller machinery, the front track loader. That came in to get a lot of those lower lying shrubs and open it up more to where our heavy machinery could get in there. And so then once we were able to remove the lower lying, a lot of our heavy machinery came in and removed some of the higher thickets, those dense stands. And it's important to note that we are not just removing it and letting it be, because again, adding nutrients back to the soil, that's not what we want. So it's important that we're removing it from the wetland. This was initially done by taking the wood and chipping it and then having it shipped. That became very expensive, and then Hurricane Michael happened and the mill shut down. And so we had to come up with alternative means. So now they are piled in the uplands, away from the wetlands, consolidated into piles and burned in the prescribed fire. So what you see here is one of our sites, some of the initial clearing where you see some of those low-lying shrubs having been removed. To the left there, you can kind of see where some of that remnant was, and then the dense thickets behind. And this is that same site looking down it. As you can see, some time has passed and you're starting to see some regrowth of those shrubberies. So mechanical clearing is important, but we're not getting it back to the habitat that it needs to be. And so that brings in the other major important for our restoration efforts, and that's fire.
Right. Yeah. So as Kimmy mentioned, just clearing the land itself is not alone. We need to reapply prescribed fire for several reasons. And so one of those is because this black tie is going to be very fast growing and can reestablish in just a couple months. And the other reason being that these plants evolved alongside fire. And so it's really important for their life cycle and for their health to be able to receive that prescribed fire as well.
All right, so I've told you a lot about the operational side of things of when we partner with the parks, and now I get to tell you a little bit more about what Getty and I do, more of the biological aspect. So we do actually do species ID throughout the park to add to the unit management plan for the park, but our main focus is the vegetation monitoring that we do twice a year in the spring and the fall. This is looking at both pre and post-treatment data. We have 33 sites spread throughout the park, 3 transects at a site for 99 transects total. And so what a transect might look like is a meter tape running from the upland to the wetland. Every 10 meters, we take that PVC square meter plot down on the ground and assess what's happening in that plot. And so at the data, we're looking at our percent woody cover, what all is there, specifically our percent tie, that Cliftonia monophylla, the height of it, how high it's growing. We want to assess our percentage of forbs, our graminoids, our grasses and things like that. Our percent litter, so we know how much of the like leaf litter and stuff that's adding nutrients to the soil, how much is there. Number of stems for each woody species, so we can kind of assess how quickly these things are growing back, as well as the percent cover for all other species to get a good assessment of the biodiversity. We also look at depth assessment, not at every site, but some of the sites where we did the initial restoration, the very beginning, a piece of rebar was placed flush with the ground. And every monitoring season, we actually do a measurement of how far that rebar has been exposed. So we know how much of that nutrient layer we're removing and getting it back to that nutrient poor habitat. In 2022, we did send off some of our preliminary data to our ecologist in Atlanta, and he did find that our restoration work is increasing plant species richness. So again, we're not getting rid of anything. You're going to find the same species in our degraded sites as you find in our restored. We're just opening up that canopy and providing the habitat again, so we get our species richness back, our biodiversity. And to kind of tie it back to the orchid that started it all, this is actually an amazing photo that was taken at the beginning of the project. Jeff, our supervisor, got permission to put a game camera out and just kind of see what was visiting our orchids. And he caught this amazing photo of a sphinx moth going at dusk to feed from the orchid. And so it kind of presents questions of what could be pollinating these species. And so with that, is there any questions? Yes.
Have you done any monitoring of the large mammal wildlife, the pre and post effects of this?
Not large mammal. Most of what's been focused on has been the herpetological component, the amphibians and the reptiles as well. And there has been some insect monitoring done, but we haven't done large scale before.
How do we volunteer for the frog stuff?
That would be contacting Kelly Coles. They did say something about volunteering there. The project is coming to an end, but you never know. There could be some opportunities. They are a lot of fun. They're my absolute favorite part of helping her out. Yes.
So with the pitcher plants and the diverse vegetation that's popping back up, you always hear the seed banks there. Is it really the seed bank or the root bank or both?
Yes.
How long will it stay? Because this has been suppressed for a while, right?
It did seem like what our ecologist was able to find is that it does take time for things to establish. Sometimes it might be 4 to 5 years to get it back to what you need to be. But as long as you are maintaining that fire after that, it does seem like they are persistent and will stay. And the seed bank definitely plays a factor in that. Anybody else? Oh, we did do it. Okay. All of these photos are from Jeff, our supervisor, his amazing photos of things found in the field. Yeah.
How often do you have to burn?
It is dependent because where we're located, there is a lot of like public around. So it's really dependent on the wind direction and everything. They try and do burning in certain zones every year. Sometimes it can't happen just depending on weather, wind, all of that, but they really do try and burn every year.
Now that a lot of things are cleared as well, it makes that burning process a
So
lot
much
easier.
easier.
So we're hoping to kind of speed that up a little bit as well. But ideally, every 1 to 3 years is how much it should be burning. So
There's a lot of palmettos in some of those pictures. And I know that's a native plant around. Is that native to these savannas or is it?
Yes,
that would be.
yes, it is.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. All right, now on to Billy from FWC.
Good afternoon. My name is Billy. I'm a biologist with FWC. I am an area biologist for a couple of our local wildlife management areas. So that's Pine Log State Forest here in Bay County, the Carter Tract, Pine Creek, which is up in Washington County, and next door neighbor to Deer Lake, Point Washington over in Walton. So today I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some of the practices that we use to manage upland habitats for wildlife, with specific examples of things that we do with the WMAs that I work at, and as well as some projects that I've worked on in the past. All right, so why manage for uplands? Why not take a hands-off approach? When do we manage? No simple answer to that question. Generally speaking, we're talking about management practices that are meant to improve or maintain wildlife habitat in some way or provide some ecosystem benefits. So these might be practices that are broadly beneficial to a number of different species, kind of like an umbrella approach, or maybe you want to apply some benefit to rare or endangered species or promote some population for like game species, for example. So before we get into specific examples of how and why we manage habitat, we can't really talk about uplands in the southeast without first introducing the longleaf pine. So collectively, I'm going to refer to these communities as longleaf pine forests, but I wanted to emphasize that these are really diverse communities in terms of species composition, soil types, anything from sandhill to very wet areas, and also a lot of variation in structure. But generally, in terms of structure, these are open canopy habitats with pretty sparse mid-stories. So it's going to be a canopy of pines, tolerant oaks, and other hardwoods, and a really diverse herbaceous layer, which you saw a lot of. And longleaf pine once dominated the southeastern United States. So this was the dominant forest type from East Texas all the way up to Southern Virginia. These are fire dependent communities. We'll get more into fire in the upcoming slides, but currently there's only about 3% what used to be nearly 92 million acres longleaf. You can kind of see the strongholds here on the map. We have Anglin Air Force Base, Blackwater State Forest, and Conecuh National Forests, as well as Apalachicola to the east are the ones most relevant to us. So kind of what happened to it. Basically, post-European settlement, we lost a lot of it gradually just to development, agriculture, as well as conversion to pine plantations. So generally logged longleaf, and then it would be replanted with faster growing, more commercially viable pines like slash and loblolly. And then what remained of it was generally suffering from a lot of fire suppression. So now we'll get into longleaf pine and the relationship with fire. So most of our uplands, including longleaf pine, historically maintained by fire. This is a regular natural disturbance that kept the landscape in what kind of is referred to as successional arrestment. So basically it keeps it in a state of open canopy, plenty of herbaceous cover. So pre-colonial settlement, lightning strikes would be responsible for igniting these fires, sometimes Native Americans as well. They were kind of the original practitioners of prescribed fire. Basically, once the fire would ignite, it could burn for hundreds of thousands of acres unimpeded before it would reach a river or some other natural fire break or just run out of fuel. But it's important to note these were fairly low intensity fires. They're just burning through mostly fine fuels. And a lot of the plants in these communities are adapted to fire, and many of them actually depend on it. So the longleaf has a grass stage, burns, it triggers rapid growth, and the bark is extremely thick. It's super resistant to heat. Wiregrass, which is a major component of a lot of longleaf communities, won't flower until it's burned. And similarly, there's a lot of unique and imperiled wildlife species that are really closely associated with these fire maintained upland habitats. Two that probably come to mind most often are the gopher tortoise and red cockaded woodpecker. In the absence of regular fire, you get that hardwood encroachment, canopy closes, and then you start to lose the ground cover and a lot of the diversity with it. Probably not alone in this opinion, but I think that prescribed fire is probably the single most important tool that we have in managing upland habitats for wildlife. So essentially what this is using controlled fire to shape the landscape. We're considering fuels, wind, smoke behavior, proximity to structure, and to do this safely. So which brings us back to that question of why and when we manage. So we're doing when we apply fire in this way, we're mimicking a natural process that really no longer occurs regularly enough on a fragmented landscape to maintain these communities in the way that they once were. So we're also limiting fuels and minimizing wildfire risk, so that's part of it. And from a habitat management perspective, we can rotate our burn schedules so that units are burned over different seasons on different timescales, which kind of creates a habitat mosaic. So you can really create this non-uniform landscape that will benefit probably the widest variety of species. You know, in some ways it seems kind of counterintuitive. We're lighting the woods on fire to improve the habitat. But just to illustrate some of the effects of prescribed fire here. So this is at one of the areas that I work at. This is the Carter Tract to Beacon Fina Creek. So we did this burn on a hillside back in May. So I think the first picture, that's the 29th of May. You can see that was during the fire. The middle picture was 4th of June, literally 6 days later. Caught that pine snake in a snake trap. And then you can see the snake is fine. He survived the fire. And you can also see in that picture, it's really cool, is that wiregrass is already starting to regrow. And that's, again, just 6 days after the fire went through. And then that last picture I took earlier this week, the wiregrass is now above my waist, should be flowering soon. And you can almost not tell that it ever burned, except for a few char marks on some of those trees there. But obviously, prescribed fire isn't always going to be practical or feasible. There's concerns with smoke and roadways, as well as what happens if a fire does escape containment, you know, danger to structure. So we deal with that at Point Washington a lot. So you have Highway 98 to the north, you have $1 million homes and 38 to the south of it. So it really limits the burn opportunities in some ways. So it can be tough. But we do have some other tools in the kit to employ when burning is limited. So I'll briefly touch on some of those. Those are mechanical treatments, which you heard plenty about, herbicide, and then I'll finish with a few examples of some things we do for specifically like for game species on the WMAs that I work at. So this is an example. I was still at Eglin Air Force Base for this. This was a gopher tortoise translocation site. It's frequently burned, but it had been really densely planned with longleaf pine, like more densely than would naturally occur and more densely than we wanted it to be. So as these pines started to get taller, obviously they're very resilient to fire. The fire's not doing anything to them. So they're getting pretty thick. They're starting to crowd one another out, and they're really starting to shade the understory. So if they were allowed to continue to grow, eventually that canopy would provide way more shade than we want for tortoises. So very simply, we just went in with a chainsaw, a couple chainsaws and some brush saws and just thinned those young longleafs out and recreated the open habitat that we wanted for tortoises. So I won't spend too much time on this one because you heard more than enough about wetland restoration, way better than I can explain here, but this is just another example at Eglin. So these ephemeral wetlands they're isolated, they're seasonally dry ponds. They're critically important to a lot of amphibian species that use them as breeding habitat. But fire exclusion can really be amplified in some of these areas just because the conditions need to actually apply prescribed fire. are often pretty limited. So, you know, you have to have a dry basin during a burn window. So they can become, as you've seen, choked out with hardwoods very easily. You lose that herbaceous ground cover, and then you lose the breeding habitat with it. So this is just a situation where we came in and mechanically removed some hardwoods. I think this was just hand cleared. And we also do this in combination with some herbicide application, just to help kill some of the unwanted vegetation and to really limit some of the resprout. I think this is an area where prescribed fire was going to be difficult to reintroduce. So if we did so, it would have had to have been like very opportunistically. It wouldn't be something we could rely on. So another example of a creek that was really getting choked out. This is habitat for the Florida bog frog, which is a species that's pretty much only found on Egland and Blackwater State Forest, so it's nowhere else in the world. So this probably involves some heavy mechanical equipment treatment, just coming in, clearing it, and then a lot of herbicide in the follow-up. I did want to briefly touch on invasive species management. So this is an example of an exotic invasive called climbing fern that we have at Pine Log. It's pretty nasty. It really smother out other vegetation, creates a monoculture. It can also creep up into the tops of the trees, into the canopy, and if it does ignite, it can become a fuel ladder up into the canopy and create crown fires, which we really don't want. So we're trying to keep this in check, and unfortunately with a lot of these invasive plants, it's if you don't catch them early enough, eradication becomes impossible, and it's more just like playing whack-a-mole and constantly battling it. If you're diligent, usually you can manage it. And then lastly, these are just a few things that we do for some game species on some of these areas. On the left is a wood duck nesting box at the Carter Tract. So they are cavity nesters. So basically what we're doing is just providing an artificial nesting structure that should help improve reproductive success. And then the map on the right just kind of shows we have a large network of food plots at Pine Log and Point Washington. So we plant these during different seasons, and these are just meant to provide supplemental forage for a number of game species. So primarily deer, quail, and turkeys. And these are just obviously meant to benefit game populations and improve hunting opportunities. Main takeaway here is we kind of have to get creative and be flexible in an ever-changing landscape. And these are just a few of the tools that we use to do that. Hopefully it's at least semi-interesting, and with that, I'll take any questions.
What is that on the bottom left?
That is a reticulated flatwood salamander. So that's one of those species that really needs the pristine ephemeral wetlands. They're kind of a Goldilocks. If they don't have it perfect, then generally lose them pretty quickly. So.
Where are they found right now? Do you know?
Stronghold is Egland. There's still some hanging on to Escribano Point Wildlife Management Area. Historically, they were at Pine Log and Point Washington. I think it's been over a decade since we've seen them at Pine Log, and longer than that at Point Washington.
Do you think your lands are ready to move some back?
Ours personally, the properties that I manage, no, we're working on some of that. We just started to do some very small scale wetland restoration, but it's a ways to go before we get there. So hopefully maybe a little closer than we are, but.
But will you actually physically build those species back when it is ready, or is it just like if they come, they come?
It's, in some cases, I think there's too many barriers, like they would not be able to recolonize on their own at this point with highways and just the fragmented landscape that we have, but there is some pretty good evidence that they do respond to translocation if the habitat is there. So they've done a lot of work at Eglin. They've done some really, really impressive stuff as far as clearing wetlands and getting them back into the state that they need to be. And some of those have been recolonized on their own by nearby ponds. So that was exciting to see. And they've also had success moving larval animals to restored wetlands and then documenting that they not only stuck around, they're reproducing successfully. So it's promising, but it can be tough to get them into that state. And
Other questions? I have a question.
it's
Do you have, or does the agency have conflict between managing for habitat and managing for like game species that you guys have to then incorporate into this process?
I am sure we do. I personally have not experienced it.
Okay.
Anyway, so we cooperatively manage all of our properties, so we help with the management, but generally the management practices themselves are handled by either forestry, Florida Forestry, or you can find a Northwest Florida Water Management. So we get to help with the burns and stuff. But they're generally in charge of most of the management actions. For the most part, I think everybody's pretty on board with prescribed fire. That hasn't come up yet, but
I like to point out what you said. I think is a good reminder that there's a lot of us. We feel bad for the animals that can't move out of the fireway, right? But once the habitat's improved, the ones that remain are probably healthier. But also what you're saying is once you get back to the way it really kind of should be, you have a lower fire, slower creeping fire, so animals are more able to get out of the way, right? Once
yes, yeah, it's.
you're getting back to that point.
So we kind of you have what's called restoration burns. Those can be pretty intense because a lot of like the tie, it can burn, but the conditions that you need to get it to burn are kind of spicy. Like so it's one of those things where it can get to a point where it takes a lot to get it to burn, but that's much closer to a wildfire when it does happen. So it's, yeah, but when it gets to that point, it's also, there's not nearly as much that can use it anymore at that point. So yeah, and most of these species really are, not that you don't lose some, like, I mean, that comes with it, but it's, what you're gaining is far outweighs whatever you might potentially lose in terms of individual animals.
Okay, thank you so much, appreciate it. So we do have a few minutes left, so I'm not gonna make you sit up front, but I'll open the floor if there's any other questions for any of the speakers today or the estuary program. Floor is open. You guys feel like you learned something? All right. Well, this is reoccurring monthly, so our next topic is gonna be stormwater. So we will be talking about stormwater. We also have a survey that we're gonna be asking participants to fill out. It's anonymous, just to give us an understanding of your understanding of stormwater, because we do have a grant to look at stormwater. So come back next month. It is October 12th. It's the second Thursday. The second Thursday. The 10th. So there we go. October 10th, same place, same time. Thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you. If you have not signed in, please be sure to sign in on it. Help yourself to some estuary program.
Yeah.